Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of you have joined us over the years, you realize that there is a component that we like to bring in when it comes to midlife, and people are seeking those changes or the desire to actually begin to go after life in a way that really serves us more than serves others. Although serving others is definitely a great thing to do, sometimes many of us have found that we've left behind things, goals, dreams, possibilities, of ways that we think our lives really should be. So what we try to bring to the program are ways that we can approach this particular dilemma and see if there's a way that you can work through it and actually begin to achieve and realize and experience the kind of life you know is waiting there for you. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a wonderful guest of the Recovery Wellness Center, which is located in Portland, Oregon. She has more than 20 years of experience, and she knows how to help people manage their wisdom and their recovery in this particular center. She's going to be talking to us today about how we go about doing that and what you can experience as you come to approach her. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Julie Valente. Julie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking.
You bet. Now, how did you get started with this wisdom and recovery? I know that you started out as a licensed nurse and you were helping people heal on a physical level, but it seemed like something kind of pulled you in a different direction after a while. What happened there?
Well, in the 80s, there started to become a real buzz about the connection between emotional issues and physical issues. And the more I researched that, the more I began to really get involved in that and decided that maybe I wanted to get in on more of a preventative end as opposed to going in and taking care of people that were already in the hospital, already suffering from, physical illness. There was that connection, that dis-ease that began to be a popular term that people were using. And today it's pretty interesting because the Medical Association actually puts in writing that over 95% of dis-ease is now stress-related. So I think they were really onto something there in the 80s, and I think I wanted to be, a pioneer in that.
Well, you certainly have done more than pioneering work as you created this wellness center. Tell us what goes on there as people come and they see you.
Well, usually the Wellness Center is very poorly advertised. I don't do any advertising, so it's all word of mouth. So often I'm seeing people and their families and their friends and their coworkers. But what seems to become important to people is they come in, and my job there, I'm the owner as well as a clinician there, and I like to interview people, talk to them, find out what's going on, what's right in their lives, what's not right in their lives, and begin to look at what is the root cause of the things that aren't right in their lives. So I do a pretty careful assessment, and it usually involves what is the environment that you grew up in, because that's sort of my specialty is understanding what are you holding in memory and what is your, what are you repeating or recreating. So I do a lot of study. I do a lot of neurological psychology, so studying the brain and then using the way that the brain works to help me to understand what's going on for the people that come to see me. I do counseling and workshops and classes and groups and, everything and anything that can possibly help a person come to terms with who they really are and who they really want to be.
It's interesting, too, Julie. I remember when I was in high school, there used to be kind of a running joke here and there. Well, tell me about your childhood whenever a friend of yours would have a problem. And even though that seems to be, a joke in some ways, there's a lot of truth about what happens in childhood development that really pens a lot of decisions that we make throughout our lives. And that seems to be an approach that you have here, like brain development and attachment. What does that all mean?
Well, it is the main approach, and it's one of my sort of signature classes, which is early childhood brain development and attachment conflict. And what that actually means is when you're a child, your number one purpose, your brain is directing you to attach to your caregiver. A little child can't survive without that attachment. So oftentimes in life, that attachment can be compromised. And when that attachment is compromised through maybe the parent is using drugs or alcohol, or maybe the parent has some sort of mental disorders, or maybe there's even a divorce or a death. When that infant can't attach to those big people, there's a whole set of hormones that go on in the little child's brain. And those hormones are stress hormones. So now we have a very small child who's got a lot of stress hormones on board, and that can be a real problem. It can have a strong impact on how that brain develops. And then there's another sort of sideline thing that's going on, which are children are all magical believers. You know, they have what we call locus of control. In other words, they believe that they make everything happen. If I blow out the candles on the cake, my wish will come true. So if children can't attach to their parents, or their parents are not available to them, the child believes, not that the parents, what's wrong with my parents, the child believes, what's wrong with me, that I can't get my parents to attach to me in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. And then that lack of attachment sets up for a reenactment over and over in your life.
It was several months ago, I was flipping through the channels on television, one of those rare moments that I get a chance to do that, and I came across one of these shows that was helping to get people to lose weight. And this was different from the typical one that's been out there for a while, but this focused on one individual, and I found myself actually compelled to watch this for the whole 2 hours or 2.5 hours that it was on, and it was about a woman who was in her, I believe, late 20s, and she wanted to lose quite a bit of weight. She had actually tipped the scales at something like 435 pounds, I can't remember. It was just some crazy amount. And so one of the exercises and how I came into the program is it started by showing her running on the beach between the lifeguard towers. And what I didn't know is were saying later in the show, this was one of the goals. She had always wanted to run on the beach like they do in Baywatch. And what was fascinating about this is, and she had just this one coach, and he was to coach her for an entire year to help her reach what her ideal weight goal, which was somewhere right around 160 pounds, I believe it was. So you're looking at a significant amount of weight to lose in a year. And what was fascinating was, as she was doing this first exercise of running on the beach from one tower to the next, quite, a distance, at least a quarter of a mile, is at one point she stopped and she began crying. And it was like something that came from left field. And what had come out was the fact that she had felt abandoned because she was in fact adopted. Now, even though her adoptive parents to this day love her dearly as their own, there was that feeling of being, abandoned, obviously, by the parents that gave her up for adoption. Now, besides that, does it go even further back where, let's say, a fetus, for instance, as it's developing in the mother's womb, could also pick up those feelings of not being wanted? Can it go back that far?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. And I work with adopted people frequently. And what they find is that, of course, the baby is in the mother's womb, and it is attached through the umbilical cord to all of the mother's systems, all of the baby's nutrients, all the baby's energy, everything is going to the baby from the mother. So the baby is holding in what we call body memory the levels of anxiety, if the mother is anxious, if the mother is depressed, if the mother is joyful. All of these neurotransmitters, all these chemicals are going and being fed to the baby. So the baby begins to memorize this sort of baseline hormonal way of being. Then something else is happening, which is the baby is also being wired to, we use the word wired to the movement of the mother and to the tone of her voice. So when the baby is born, its natural impulse and instinct is to reattach to the organism in which created it. And when that baby is taken away and put into a stranger's arms where the heartbeat is different, or maybe it goes into a small little plastic bed, maybe it goes to one parent and then to another and then to another, and finally settles down with one, that's a real trauma for that baby. And even though it doesn't have the mind to think like, what's going on here? I don't understand this. It is experiencing it on deep psychological and emotional levels. That's why a lot of times people that find out that they're adopted later on in life say, I always sensed there was something not quite right about me and about, what was going on in my life. Mm-hmm. And again, as children believe, I make everything happen. When it comes down to the relinquishment of an infant or a little tiny baby, the child will then believe there was something wrong with me, that my parents gave me away.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and even when I talk to people as adults, they say,
right.
I don't know why. They're still deeply conflicted on an emotional level about that.
Now, here's another way to think about this, too. From that perspective, when a child is given up for adoption, you can see that's pretty clear. But here's another one to revert back to, and I guess maybe a part of me wonders about this due to my own circumstances. Yes, that's right, folks. Sometimes I sprinkle a little bit of me during these shows here, but here's the thing, okay? I was born to a mother who was a single mother, and the father just didn't want anything really to do about it. From my understanding, he did that at least more than once. As I discovered that I had a sister out there about 5 years ago. Just imagine that, And so here's what's interesting, and my question is this. So here you have, and you see a lot of single young mothers this day and age, and I suppose it's been that way for a while. This was back in the 60s, of course, but as that happened, so the father impregnates the girl. She now carries this baby, but then I don't really want anything to do with this, and he's gone, or whatever. Now, you can imagine the emotional trauma that this young female or this female is having. Can that be passed along to the child with the sense that I'm not wanted or loved, no matter how much the mother bears the child and raises it and loves it? Do they still feel something like that?
Absolutely, because first of all, the other person isn't there. So if we're looking at genetics and we're looking at energy, and we all know that I'm energy, you're energy,
right.
The soap I'm sitting on is energy, so everything is energy. And so when little tiny children don't really have a fully formed brain, that means they don't have the part of the brain that has thinking and logic and language and all that. Everything is more sensate. In other words, they're coming from emotion. They're coming from the energy around them. They sense things much more acutely than we do once we start, thinking what we think we know. So they can sense that there's an absence, and they can sense the mother's, distraught, if the mother is distraught over the situation. Mm-hmm. The child wants to take care of that in which takes care of it. So if the mother is distraught, the child can sense that, and then the child begins to adapt itself to try and take care of the mother, ultimately because, again, that child needs that mother, needs to have that attachment in order to be able to survive. If the mother is anxious, the child's going to try and do something to compensate and to take care of that mother, which of course which puts the child then on tilt, because children are never meant to be taking care of the parents in their life. It should be the other way around. Mm-hmm. That's a child that's very likely to grow up to be an adult that will go out and seek out a partner that they have to take care of.
Mm-hmm. Or a rescue, for that matter.
Exactly the same. Exactly, rescue. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that come into my clinic and they tell me their story, and I can see their patterns. I can see through relationship after relationship, situation after situation, even their job, that they are out there rescuing and trying to fix things, and ultimately they learned that a long time ago, and then they just keep reenacting it because, again, the brain is a survival organ, and it hardwires to that which it has survived in, and doesn't really want to do anything different. Wants to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Anything different could pose as a threat. Mm-hmm. So,
I know I've talked many times on this program with experts just like yourself about the brain and how it works, and we've done a lot of neurobiological talks. And it was really fascinating to realize, when we would talk about, for instance, how we want to change and why that's so difficult. And I said, well, biologically speaking, there's a reason that is inherent in all of us why that is. And I made it, very clear. And this was from the experts, and it sounds to me like you're saying the very same thing, is The brain loves to be in a groove. It loves to be in a consistent, regular, predictable pattern because of the amount of energy it takes to run the body, basically.
Correct.
And so anything different says, oh, now I've got to dig up some extra energy and go in this direction. So what does it do? It tries throwing some things at you that will cause you not to move in the direction that you believe you want to move in. For instance, maybe you want to start running to lose that weight, and after a couple of days, well, you did run a couple of days. Why don't you take the next few days off? That's the brain tricking you because it's saying, hey, you're about to change, man. Things were just okay the way they were.
Exactly.
And you can see how you could talk yourself out of change pretty easily, which is biological to all of us.
True that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I work, so people come in and they say, this is a lot of work, and how long is this going to take? And they're very, very, they want change tremendously. They want to see their lives differently, but they are still somehow embedded in kind of magical thinking in that somehow this is going to happen without them actually taking possession of the vehicle. I say the brain is the vehicle, and you better learn how it runs so that you can get in the driver's seat and drive it where you need to go. Otherwise, you're just driving aimlessly, slamming into brick walls and going over ledges. And that can be very painful, and people can't seem to understand why. They are so desperately want to do something different and why it seems to be so difficult to do something different.
Mm-hmm. Now, give us an example. Let's kind of pull back and take a bird's eye view of maybe a specific person that you worked with and the pattern that started from childhood and how they kind of followed that pattern, again, because what we're seeking out, it sounds like from what you're saying here, Julie, is we seek out the things that are familiar and comfortable for the brain for survival, right? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Right, exactly.
Okay. So that being said, let's talk about how this played out in a particular case with someone that you have worked with.
Okay, so for instance, a gentleman came to see me, and he had quite a disturbing childhood. He had a mother who was an alcoholic. He had a father who was a workaholic and was never present. And so he was trying to navigate these very, very difficult situations. He also had a neighbor who sexually molested him repeatedly.
Oh, boy.
So this was a guy that really had, a very, very difficult childhood. So he goes, and first of all, again, with that magical thinking, my mother is a drunk, my father isn't here, this person is hurting me, not because these are all terrible people in the world, doesn't really have the brain to think that way and conceptualize. Mm-hmm. He just experiences these things are happening to me, and he internalizes them and makes them like, I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. My mother would not drink if I were a better child. So he might try to do things better at home, or he might try and make some kind of connection with his father, or he might, maybe the only attention he's getting is from this perpetrator next door. So he may be participating in that on some degree. Kids just, they need to be seen. They need to be heard. So a lot of times children don't really experience abuse as abuse. They just experience it as, boy, there's the person that stops candy and that touches me and sees me and spends time with me, and I'm so lonely in my life otherwise. Mm-hmm. So this sets up a real issue for later on in life, of course. So this guy comes to see me, and he comes with a set of symptoms. Here's what he tells me. He says he just recently got married, but he's got a lot of concern about his relationship because she drinks. And he thinks that maybe the reason she's drinking is because he works too much. And he also finds that he can't quite stay off of pornography. And he even goes out and he's picked up a few prostitutes, so on and so forth. So when he's telling me this, even without that background, in my mind I'm saying, undoubtedly in this person's life, there was someone that drank, and it had to be attachment figure. There was somebody that was running away, and there's some kind of sexual confusion going on here because he's acting out sexually. So that's how that would be an example of a person that absolutely recreated his childhood experience in his adult life, and I see it all the time. I see it, well, I don't ever not see it.
I was going to ask you, too, Julie, in this particular case, did he take on a kind of job or career that nurtured that sort of thing as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, he took on a job that was a sales job, which took him traveling.
Right.
Right. So what he had set up in his childhood is, of course, the attachment figure. That was always not going to be available for him, the mother. And then he also took on the role of the father by creating something that he could run from, which is, his deepest desire was to run away from all of that when he was a child.
Sure.
And then he has perpetuated, I have a saying, which is first at the hands of others and then at my own, in which now I have recreated the dynamics, even all the way down to the sexual abuse, right? Because we know it's abusive to be on the Internet and put yourself into harm's way and hiring prostitutes. It's very risky behavior. And so the propensity to recreate and reenact, which is simply the brain just saying, move towards anything that you recognize, that's familiar, because if you're alive, don't change it. It's really it's a very, it's very perplexing to people when they realize how specifically they have either recreated their own childhood or sometimes they'll recreate their parents' relationship. Interesting, my mother was married to a male man, and now I met a man, and he's a male man. Or, my mother was married to a man named Steve, and, I've had 3 partners with the name Steve. It's almost ironic. So that desire to recreate, and I call it sort of redo to undo, but maybe on some very deep psychological and emotional levels, if I can recreate the situation and do it differently, then it will heal the things that have happened in my childhood and in my past, and I can finally, the alcoholic will pick me, and finally, the sex will be a good thing instead of a traumatic thing. So,
tell me, Julie, what specifically did this person come to you to want to change about his life?
Well, that person came to me because he was suicidal.
Oh,
and
I
that
see.
was initially, he came and said, I have very deep, dark thoughts, and I'm thinking about suicide as an option out. And then I said, well, okay, so the problem's not the problem, it's the solution. Yes, that's going to be a big problem if you try to make an attempt, but suicide sounds like a solution to something else. So whenever anybody comes to me with a problem, I use the problem's not the problem, it's the solution, so that I can get right down to what's really going on here. And so then when he began to talk about what was really going on, then I pulled his wife in. We did some counseling with his wife to see if she was ready to confront some of her issues. I sent him to the SAA meeting so that we can work on his sexual issues. So we take the problems very, very seriously, and they need to stop. He needs to stop hiring prostitutes. His wife needs to stop drinking. He needs to maybe question the way he's working and seeing if there's some kind of boundaries or limits he could put to that. So we definitely want to create a plan to take care of the immediate, but then we're going to do the deeper stuff, which is what was it like for you as a child, so that he can grieve the loss of what he didn't get as a child. I mean, he didn't have parents there paying attention to him, supporting him, nurturing him. He got into harm's way. And when you look at your soul and your spirit and how corroded that can get from those experiences, it can set up a real deep grief process. There's tremendous loss in not having a childhood that looks like the kind of childhood that children should have, playful and safe and nurturing and love, and that ideal that we all wanted to have in our childhood, but most of us didn't get.
Boy, us humans are sure crazy creatures, aren't we?
Well, it's I guess we could call it crazy, but I say that we are, we have not yet evolved to the place that we could be at. I think our brains are under-evolved. I think we've evolved technologically because we've had so much stimulation from the outside world around, all the smartphones and the computers and all the advances in technology, I mean, our prefrontal cortex is like grown exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the other part of our brain where we have our emotions and our hormones and our, memories, we haven't really done much work there. And the crazy thing about the brain, using the word crazy, is that when that emotional part of our brain gets activated, unfortunately, that thinking part of the brain has a tendency to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't, what a more evolved brain would look like, and that was the old Neanderthal. That was necessary for survival. That's just the brain's a survival organ. So if there's fear, or if there's something that you need to negotiate, some kind of fight or flight situation, you don't have time to be thinking about all kinds of different options. Should I run? Should I grab a tool? Should I get a big stick? What should I do? Boom, you're already gone. You don't have time for that, so the brain just shuts down all the thinking, and you go right into fight or flight action. And we're still sort of operating with that brain, but in a time that we really don't need it. Our lives are not being threatened. We're not fighting or flighting. We're really not. So to not have really strong neurological connections and to not be able to keep up your communication and your reasonable thought process while you're negotiating emotional situations, it's just, it puts us at a tremendous disadvantage because the world we live in is starting to demand more and more of that. We're seeing that relationships are corroding and people are having lots of they're disappearing into this technological world because maybe they're not comfortable really integrating their reasonable thought process with their emotional part of their brain. So we're messy. We can say we're messy. We can say we're crazy. And I just say we just haven't evolved our brains to the capacity that it needs to be evolved into for the world that we're living in today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what I have a passion about.
I always found it funny, Julie, when I was growing up, the parent-teacher conferences in school, and I would hear the teacher say, Daniel is really an intelligent guy. He's sharp, but he just isn't living up to his potential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I always found that odd now that as I reflect on it later in the years and to think to myself, we're always on our way to our potential, but achieving one's true potential takes quite a bit.
It takes I think it takes a lot of self-knowledge. And first of all, little kids aren't going to be able to tap into that. And again, if there are things going on in your life and you have a sense of self that might be somewhat wrong or somewhat bad, I know for myself as a child, there were things going on in my household that really didn't give me the luxury to live up to my potential because I was distracted, right? I had a mother that wasn't well. I had a father that was somewhat absent. I had, conflict with siblings. It wasn't a real safe home for me. So my ability to just luxuriate in going to school and learning and so on and so forth wasn't there. Mm-hmm. I was scared, and I was confused, and I was trying to rescue and help this family so that I could be okay and safe. And meanwhile, I was tired. I went to school tired sometimes. Or I went to school insecure, feeling like there's something wrong with me and I don't fit in.
Right.
And those are the kinds of things that can really impact your ability to live up to your potential. They expect you to be able to be sharp and focused and learning, in a continuum and in a norm. And without really understanding what's going on in this child's life that could be getting in the way of that. And could it be emotional?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we do our children a little bit of a disservice if we're not paying careful attention to what's really going on with this individual child rather than sort of a blanket statement like that. Mm-hmm. Something else goes on is if you're in a family where there's a lot of confusion and attachment isn't secure, again, like I mentioned, those stress hormones get activated, and there's a couple of stress hormones, one adrenaline and one cortisol, that seem to have a particular effect on the neurological wiring of a child. So in that the neurological wiring has a coating to it, much like an electric outlet, that you put a plug in, it's got a rubber or plastic coating on it so that the fragile wires can't be broken or they can't hurt you. And it's similarly in the brain. It's got what's called a myelin sheath, which protects these fragile wires as they're forming in the child's brain. So an excess of adrenaline and cortisol, which are the stress hormones, actually have been reported to burn through that myelin sheath, therefore creating damage to those neurological wires. So research is telling us now that stress and learning disorders have a strong correlation. So early childhood stressful situations, inability to attach, conflict in the home, often result in learning disorders. So perhaps the child, I don't know if this is your case, but perhaps I know for myself, I had dyslexia. So there's a strong correlation. People are looking at me, or teachers are looking at me and saying, wow, she's really not living up to her potential. They have no idea that, A, I'm not sleeping at night because I'm getting up with some kind of crazy things going on in my family, and B, that creates a lot of stress hormones, and that can actually be doing damage on a neurological level. So I think it's so important. That's why I've been so excited over the last 12 to 15 years when we're actually now beginning to study the brain and look at these neurological connections, looking at how the child's brain develops. It's just, I like to bring it more and more into the public view so that people can say, wow, there's nothing wrong with me, it's just my brain.
Right. And the
right?
beauty about that is, too, is that, you know, as we've talked about over the last 10 years on the program here very consistently, is that the brain can rewire. The brain is plastic. It changes. There's a beauty in that, and tell us why.
Well, there's, of course, because, and I say, you know, it's only been in the last 12 to 15 years that research is now telling us through all the technology and all the brain imagery and the brain mapping, wow, we can see that you can actually change the neurological firing of your brain. So in other words, what went down one pathway over and over and over and over and over again created a very deep groove with true intention and with replacement thinking, you can travel a different pathway, and if you do it with time and consistency and repetition, you will begin to fire in that direction as opposed to the other direction. I say, wow, you know, God, 10, 15 years, this is all brand new, but the truth is that this has been going on for over 75 years. We just didn't call it what it was. When you look at the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to see that there's a person who uses drugs and alcohol to solve their problems, but their life becomes so unmanageable, they decide that they're going to go into a program. So then something terrible happens, just life stressors, and boom, they go and drink. And then they go, oops, I wasn't going to do that. So they travel that same pathway. So then the next time something stressful happens, they think about drinking, but instead they go to a meeting. Then something stressful hits again, as it always does, and then they think about going to have a drink, but they go to a meeting again, or they call a sponsor, or something like that. Eventually, they're sitting in their 12-step group, their home group, and they're saying, hey, guess what? You should have seen the day that I had today. I'm telling you, there was a time I would go and drink over it, and today I didn't even think of it. Mm-hmm. That's rewiring.
Right.
Right? So you know, we've got the technology to prove it, but it's actually been going on for years and years and years, and that's what rewiring is. It's tolerating the discomfort. It's uncomfortable not to go and have that drink. It's uncomfortable to learn different kinds of coping skills. But if you do, your life changes exponentially. You begin to have that happy, joyous, and free life. And if drunks can do it, like, right? Can't we all, you know, have those goals and actions? So it won't be comfortable. It won't be comfortable. It will take time.
Now, Julie, do you ever have somebody that comes to you and perhaps they haven't hit the bottom of the barrel, like, for instance, what you were describing earlier with the client who was suicidal, but somebody who comes to you and they're really working hard at, you know, achieving, you know, dreams or goals that they've set before themselves, but then there are these blocks that kind of get in the way, you know, and then they say, you know, look, I just can't seem to figure it out here, but I keep hitting these obstacles or these things come and kind of blow my success or my advancement out of the water. You probably have people that you work on a peak performance level as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, the majority of my clients are really high-functioning, successful people in the world.
Right.
And what they're coming in with is most often, honestly, they're coming in with relationship difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
They've got everything else, wired, so to speak. They've got a lot of things going on in their life. But when it comes to that intimate, attached relationship, that's where they're going to be struggling. And that makes total sense to me because first you have your parents holding you in their arms, kissing you, calling you baby, right? And then the brain holds, my attachment figure. Then you go out in the world, and the very next time you're held in someone's arms and kissed and called baby is, the significant other that you're trying to create this heart bond and intimate attachment with. And when you do that, that will trigger all of those unmet needs, all of those, losses and all those feelings, and then you begin to act them out in the relationship. You're going to expect this partner to take care of all those unaddressed needs. But guess what? They're doing the same thing, and it turns into a little bit of a mess. So I find really, really successful people being very capable in their lives, but when it comes to having beautiful, connected, attached, intimate relationships, that's their biggest struggle. Mm-hmm. And so I work a lot with people who are struggling with that.
When you think from the perspective of this attachment, as you've been talking about, that you'll have many people who are very successful and they really don't seem to be enjoying themselves, mm-hmm. perhaps because they're not getting the validation they thought getting to that level of success would bring them. Hence going back, no matter what I did, it was never pleasing to my mother or my father. And I'm doing something I can't stand anyway, but this is the only way I know to hopefully get that attention that I didn't feel I was getting before. That's kind of an interesting scenario that plays out true, I'm sure.
Oh, it definitely plays out. So what we talk about now, or what I try to teach clients is, when we were children, we had to have validation. We were dependent and we were codependent. In other words, the things, people, places outside of us identified us because we were completely underdeveloped, and it assisted us in our development, our understanding of who we are and whether the world is a safe place or not. Now, when we become adults, we no longer should be relying on external things to validate us. But if it didn't happen, there's this emptiness and this constant unfinished piece, which is, I need something outside of me to reflect my worth. I never really got it. Now I've got to keep, it's almost like as a driver to go out and do that. So lots of people come in and they're real identified with their job and with their car and with their house. And, they've got all these things in place, and yet it's not working. It's not really giving them that sense of me and I'm okay. I've got a bunch of stuff, but it's not doing what it was supposed to do, right? And that's kind of that immature thinking. And beginning to accept that the days of filling up from the outside in are over, and we have to grieve the loss if that didn't happen for us, and begin to step into creating our identity and who we are from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And so when you say people aren't happy with all the things they've created externally, that's absolutely true. It's an inside-out job now, and it's so important that we begin to nurture ourselves, to fill in all the little pieces. Think of what were the things that were missing in my childhood? What were the things that weren't safe? And then begin to look in your own life today and say, I need to not put myself into unsafe situations. I need to fill in all those pieces that were missing. I need to put those in for myself, whether it's nurturing, whether it's self-care, whether it's medical attention, all the things we didn't get. We have to do that for ourselves. Unfortunately, a lot of people go out into the world and they pick an attachment figure and they think, now this person will complete me, and it will never work. Mm-hmm. So then they're distraught because they somehow have drank the Kool-Aid that, my Prince Charming or, whatever the stories that we were told as children. Lots of us are operating on really, really immature levels, mm-hmm. and we still have magical thinking. And the program that I work with is really getting people to take adult responsibility for their life, do their forming now from the inside out, whatever they want or believe themselves to have the capacity to be, their potential gets touched as I have the potential to do and be whatever my dreams are, and then nurturing yourself and taking care of yourself so that you can shine that externally instead of being dependent on something outside of you that's going to make it okay for you. Just isn't going to happen.
Now, as people approach wisdom and recovery, which is your business here, is it typically a talk therapy sort of a situation, or is there more to it than that?
Well, I mean, I do a lot. Talk therapy is, what I try not to do is therapy as usual. Most people that come in to see me have already seen many therapists. They've gone through all kinds of programs, and they're still deeply unhappy. And they're still, something still isn't right with them. They're not living the kind of life that they want to. So when they come to see me, we're going to go into this deep investigation of, first of all, the environments we're raised in. So it's an educational, first and foremost, around educating you about your brain. So I'm going to provide classes for you to really understand the human organism and what's going on, so that you're not just taking everything personally, but that you can have somewhat of an objective view. And it helps people to understand that this is a human organism and it's going to be hardwired and set to go a certain way and do certain things, and I can have some sense of influence on that. So it's educational. So I do classes. I also do workshops. My workshops are experiential. So in my workshops, I use art and music and play and animals, and it gives people a chance to get into that sort of childlike mind and begin to tell their story using things that are non-threatening. They have an experience, which is very different. You know, you have your conscious brain, and then you have your subconscious brain. Where your conscious brain is filled with thoughts and logic and words and formulas and language. But your subconscious brain is filled with emotion and memory and hormones. And so we really want to be able to use that part of the brain to connect with, and we process and we talk about it and we understand what just happened. So it's a blending of that, because we know that 95% of everything we do is actually coming from the subconscious brain, and only 5% from our thinking brain. And I think those numbers are pretty, maybe the world we live in today has something to do with those numbers. And if we can integrate, which is the crux of the program, is integrating that sort of subconscious brain with all that power into a more cognitive sort of using your logic and your reasoning to make real decisions. So it involves that. So there's classes and there's workshops and there's experience and there's, I even have a massage therapist then who works with people who have real, either they've had physical trauma or emotional trauma. It doesn't matter. The body bears the burden, and having some people just need to be touched. Other people need to have actual, muscles work so that they're able to release the tension that they hold in their body. When you have grief and when you are sad or when you are stressed, your body constricts and the muscles get tight. And then they can hold that position for a long time and starts to really break down the body. So we take every possible facet that will help facilitate a person's healing process. And we try to put that into the person's life so that they really, for the first time, are completely embraced on all aspects.
What kind of changes have you seen in people as they've come to wisdom and recovery?
Well, I have seen absolute profound changes. And I've had people come to me, write me Christmas cards, emails. On my website, there's a section that's called testimonials.
I'm right there right now, as a matter of fact, and the top one says neurologist.
Right. So he and what he states is that he came to my program, and absolutely changed his life. So what it really does is it pulls you, one of my classes is called the 20 Concepts. And that particular class, the very first concept is understand brain function. And then the following 19 concepts address every possible situation, thought process, feeling that you could possibly have in your adult life. And it gives you the tools of how to look at this through a perspective of, being confused, and then how to look at it at a perspective of being a mature, healthy person. And it gives all the different kinds of tools. Well, people will use those tools over and over and over again. They will think differently. They will feel differently. They will behave differently. And when that happens, their life begins to change. So the neurologist came and had been to all kinds of different therapies before, came from a tragic childhood. But when he began to use these concepts repeatedly with group support, he was able to begin to actualize a life that he had really wanted. He was able to grieve the loss of what happened that shouldn't have happened and what didn't happen that should have happened. And he was able to go on and use these tools to create the kind of life that he really wanted to live. So I'm so excited. I get lots and lots of feedback that people say this is the one thing that finally, after all the different kinds of therapies they've done, there's finally something that actually helps them to understand what was going on with them. And not just I understand what's going on with me, I understand why I do what I do, but here is exactly what I can do to change it. And if I do it over and over and over again, my life will literally change. So it's pretty exciting.
Would it be fair to say then, this is just something that comes to mind, that, who you are is not entirely your fault, but who you become will be?
And that's exactly. And that's what I say too. They sit and clients have told me I've done horrible things. I did this and I did that. For instance, the person that came in that was suicidal. Oh, I've been on the internet and I've picked these women, I've done this, and I've left my wife and, and so on and so forth. I did horrible things. And here's what I say. I call it loyalty to the perpetrator. I say first at their hands and now at your own. You're loyal to a system that you are hardwired around. So today I look at you and I tell you all those things you did, you're innocent. You're innocent. But today, if you continue to do them, now you're not innocent anymore, because now you know that you can do things differently. So yeah, people are held to a, my final concept, number 20, is adult responsibility is non-negotiable in my program. In other words, if you're not there to pick up the missing pieces and you're not there to change your life and take responsibility for what it looks like today, this isn't the program for you.
Right.
You got to go somewhere else. You got to go sit on somebody's sofa and you can talk and they can ask you how you feel and you can go on and on and on. You spend all your time and all your money and get minimal results. But if you really want to change, then you're going to have to be able to take all responsibility for everything that happens from right now going forward. So.
And that's what my mother always told me was, you'll know when you're an adult when you take 100% responsibility for everything that happens in your life.
That's right.
And I know for a fact, and I know I'm sure you've experienced this and people you've worked with, when they can come to see the reality of that and actually practice this, life in so many ways gets easier, doesn't it?
Oh, it's of course I would never ask anybody to do anything that I hadn't already done. And there's very few people that can sit across from me and tell me that they've done something that I haven't said, yeah, I've kind of done that too, or
right.
I've been involved in it in some way. And what I can say for myself is that I never really realized what life could be like until after you go through a process like this. It just absolutely changes your perception, and it's so empowering, and not like bad things don't have. Of course, you're going to have the normal. I say life is bittersweet. Develop a taste for it, right? but it's not what happens anymore to you. It's how you move through what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've really got the self that I say we were always born to have this, authentic self, and then it gets all confused by these people and places and things that happen in our lives, but we don't know who we are anymore. And that's why my program is called Wisdom and Recovery. It's that wisdom, that trueness, that authenticity, and then the ability to work through things to recover that and pull that right up into your present life. And then living from that place is just an amazing experience compared to sleepwalking and being unconscious and just reenacting and recreating and blaming and, just it's just a hard, difficult way to live. I say we lived it in our childhood. Oh my gosh, we can do something so much different in our adult life.
And do you see people becoming more fearless too as a result?
Did you say fearless?
Yes.
Right. Well, because they're confronting what are they really afraid of.
Right.
A lot of people come in and they're like, well, actually the truth is a lot of people come in and they don't know what they're feeling. They don't know if they're feeling angry. Hey, hi, how are you feeling today? They're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, I guess that's probably right, because we seem to have a whole culture and a society that doesn't encourage us to get in touch with how we're actually feeling. So a lot of people feel fear, and that's just basically that their adrenal systems are jacked up. Well, if your adrenal systems are jacked up almost on a consistent daily basis, some of the results of that are you can have TMJ, you could have ulcers, you have sleep disorders, you have bipolar, all kinds of disorders are simply caused by that jacked up adrenal system. Mm-hmm. Where did that come from? So now I'm going to trail that back, and I'm going to say, when you were a child, what were the things that frightened you? And then they're going to say, well, my mom was drunk, and my dad was mean, and, my brother beat me. So now their whole organism is wired to have a baseline of jacked up adrenals, and of course they're afraid. They're afraid. They can't even tell you what they're afraid of. It's just a body memory. Mm-hmm. And so then we work really hard to confront, like, what are you really afraid of? And so then they begin to calm down. And I might use hypnotherapy. I'm a hypnotherapist, and I might use hypnotherapy to get deep into their subconscious brain and see if we can adjust those adrenal systems, slow that heart rate down, drop that adrenaline and that cortisol, and sort of convince the subconscious that it's safe. So I do a lot of hypnotherapy with people who have, a lot of fear, or a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of, emotions that seem to be out of proportion to what's really going on in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. Always love having this on the program, because we find, as we've been doing this program now over 10 years, is that as we're out in public, and I've done different speaking engagements and different shows, and it's funny to have our banner up, it says Beyond 50, and watch how it stops people, and they literally look and mouth out Beyond 50. Then they see you looking at them, and then, well, that's me. There's a certain sense of, a little bit of anxiety, even though they're playing it off in a joking way, or, I'm not quite there yet. Like, you sense there's some, and it could be just me, but a sense of a little bit of shame, like maybe they hoped they would be further along in their lives or better off in their lives than they feel they are now. And I'm like, well, here's the idea. You're right here, right now. Move forward to where you want to go while you're still breathing in and out. There couldn't be any harm in that.
And true, and what we know today is that if we do take care of this organism and this body, and we nurture it and care for it, many times, many of us are doing that when it wasn't done for us. We weren't given proper nutrition, proper rest, proper exercise, all the wonderful things that we should have had. But if we get in touch with that now, what science is telling us is that our longevity is increased and multiplied, so that when we go beyond 50, we can make those years some of the best years of our lives and the healthiest years of our lives. So I like to look at 50 as a place. I'm beyond 50. So I like to look at that. I'm sort of just stepping into the second half. And my gosh, the second half of my life is going to be everything it's going to have all the pieces that the first half didn't. So I like to just keep celebrating hope and celebrating, even more than hope, but celebrating intention, and the intention of creating a life that is really a life worth living, something that brings us tremendous joy. Because if you're out there living a life of joy, and I am, then our children are watching us, and people are hooking into that energy. And I think it can be really a wonderful thing, not just for people themselves, but for everybody. We all have some purpose in life, and maybe just the purpose in life is to role model that life can be good. We can emanate joy.
Well, I completely agree with you, Julie, as that was part of our commitment, was to come into this particular time in a person's life and say, do you realize that most people that live this long, this is the best time of their lives, this is the most creative time of their lives, this is the chance where possibility it's just unbelievable. And I think there's such a stigma in our society with aging, and most people, well, it's because we got a youth celebrated culture. Yeah, okay, whatever. The fact is you can still think through all of this, but you need to be inspired to know that others are doing the same thing. And in fact, our very first program was on a book called The Creative Age. And I was only in my early 30s when I came across this book, and I was inspired by what I was reading. You know, this person didn't discover this till they were 47, or this person didn't start this business till they were 66. And it went on and on and on, and you realize that we spend most of the first parts, almost half of our lives, literally trying to please other people.
Correct.
And there's that sense of frustration that by the time you hit 40, you start saying, I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to do, and I don't feel any happier, any better because of it. It's time to do something different. Right.
And it gets into sort of also looking at the first half, you kind of are learning what not to do. You keep banging into walls, and you keep falling over cliffs, and you're like, oops, I don't think I should do that again. And it's almost like you're experimenting and you're setting it up. And once you hit that midpoint, you're like, okay, I think I really got it. I think I know what I should not be doing. Therefore, that creates a pretty clear path around what I could be doing.
Right.
And people really do change their lives and really do live differently when they hit that midpoint. If they, and I find that they can do that much easier if they do and get involved in the process that I encourage people to do, which is go back and notice what was missing and see if that's still missing today, or if you can get that built into your life today, because that will provide such a rich life for you.
Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. Now, your website is wisdomandrecovery.com. That's all one word?
Correct, it is.
Okay. And have you worked with people outside of Portland, Oregon?
I have, yes.
Okay.
I have clients in Seattle and in San Diego and Las Vegas. And
so your ability to do this work doesn't require somebody really to be right in front of you in an office somewhere then?
Well, now with modern technology, there's Skype, there's phone, there's FaceTime, and then, and then I do some traveling and people do traveling, and so it's really worked beautifully to be able to connect with people. You don't have to be right in Portland to get, and just talking on the phone, is just as helpful many times as it is sitting in the office looking at someone. There's something to be said about that energy that, two human beings, connected to each other. And I really don't have any clients that I haven't met face-to-face one way or another, but we do lots of work outside of the office.
So if you're willing to take a step toward a new horizon, or perhaps invent that horizon for yourself, Wisdom and Recovery is a place you can find out more about this by visiting wisdomandrecovery.com. Julie, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here on the Beyond 50 radio program. It's nice to know there are coaches like you out there getting it done.
All right. Thank you, Daniel.
You bet.
I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, you can find out more about that also. You can visit us at beyond50radio.com. Be sure to subscribe to our exclusive weekly updates. You can find out some great information there, including wisdom and recovery. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.